I think we might have had the microphone muted, so I'm going to start over with this question really quickly. So the first question says natural rate of unemployment tends to be lower when which of the following is true. And so A says firms pay efficiency wages, B says labor unions are more effective, C says the government sets an effective minimum, and D says unemployment insurance benefits are lower. So the first thing we do when we look at this problem is ask, what is the natural rate of unemployment, right? Because that does not refer to overall unemployment. And so this question is really testing our understanding of the the understanding of the subcategories or definitions of unemployment, and also the reasons or rationales for why certain types of unemployment might exist. The first thing we understand is that the natural rate of unemployment refers to the combination of or the addition of both frictional and structural unemployment. And then if we were to add cyclical unemployment into the mix, that would move us from the natural rate of unemployment to actual unemployment. So that's the first thing we have to really understand. The second thing we have to understand then is what exactly are frictional and structural unemployment, right? And so frictional unemployment refers to this idea that people need time to find the best jobs for their skill set and their preferences. In the hypothetical economy where there are 100 workers and 100 jobs available, you would think that maybe there would be zero unemployment because everybody would be unemployed and there's exactly the amount of jobs that are needed. However, that wouldn't be the case because of frictional unemployment. And this is because new firms are always being created and they're hiring new people, and old firms are being destroyed when they have to fire their old employees. And so even when there's exactly enough jobs for everybody who wants one, there's going to be a certain level of unemployment as people are going through that job search process, looking for the right, find the right job for them and find the right fit for their skill set. And that refers to frictional unemployment. And so things that affect frictional unemployment are going to be things that affect the job search process. And then the second component of the natural rate of unemployment is going to be structural unemployment. And so structural unemployment refers to situations in which it's not a question of job search. It's a question of, are there enough jobs in the economy for everybody who wants one? And when the structure of the economy is in such a way in that if 100 people are looking for jobs, maybe there are only 80 jobs available. That's going to lead to unemployment because there are simply not enough jobs going around. And so that is more of a structural issue of the economy rather than like a search process. And so structural unemployment is going to be affected by things that tend to kind of move the labor market out of equilibrium. And so these are, I think, the three things that most courses will talk about are going to be minimum wage laws, strong labor unions, and efficiency wages. And so we can take a look at those as those need to be some of our answer choices. But that's structural unemployment. So hopefully that gives us a good idea of what exactly we're dealing with in this question, right? We're dealing with things that are going to affect frictional unemployment and thereby affect job searching, or things that affect structural unemployment, which affects the equilibrium in the labor market, right? So let's talk about the structural unemployment factor first. We can graph on the right what a simple labor market might look like. So let's take a look here. And so we're gonna if the labor market is what we look like over here, right? We have our supply of labor, we have our demand for labor, and then so if the supply and demand for labor are exactly equal, then there's no structural unemployment, right? There are exactly enough jobs as there are people who are willing to work, and so there's no reason for us to find anything structurally wrong with the economy. When we find there to be structural unemployment is when we find there to be some reason for there to be a shortage in the labor market, right? And that's going to occur when the price is high at P1, right? And so at this level, there's quantity D demanded of labor and quantity S supplied of labor. And we can see that this quantity supplied of this labor is much higher than the quantity demanded for that labor. And so this is going to cause us a shortage, and this kind of difference is going to be what we know is our unemployment. And so the question we ask is, what are reasons in which we might see the price level exceed the equilibrium in which there would be no structural unemployment? And so the first theory that people are going to give us is minimum wage, right? And so if there was a strong minimum wage set above the equilibrium price, what that effectively is a price floor, right? A minimum wage is just a price floor. And so this is a classic example of a situation in which we would see prices being too high compared to equilibrium. And so the stronger minimum wages and the higher minimum wages, the higher our unemployment is going to be. So looking at answer choice C, it says the government sets an effective minimum. And so what that would lead to in terms of our structural unemployment is going to be high unemployment due to the strong price floor, right? And so that's going to actually increase the natural rate of unemployment because it increases structural unemployment. So we know C is not going to be the right answer because we're looking for a reason why the natural rate of unemployment would be lower. The second reason then, after minimum wage, that we're going to discuss commonly in a lot of economics classes is going to be strong unions. And so what unions are when workers band together and collectively advocate for higher wages, better working conditions, etc. And so if you have really, really effective and strong unions, what you're going to see is that those unions are going to be able to negotiate higher than equilibrium wages for their workers. And so higher than equilibrium wages means higher price for labor, and that's going to, again, increase our price of labor above the equilibrium level. And so the stronger and more effective labor unions are, the higher structural unemployment is, and the higher natural rate of unemployment is. So when B says labor unions are more effective, we know that's not going to be answer choice because more effective labor unions, again, are contributing to unemployment, and that's going to raise the natural rate of unemployment. And the final reason we talk about in regards to structural unemployment is efficiency wages, where firms are not required to pay more money to their workers. They just want to because higher wages result in more efficient workers, happier workers, less turnover, and higher skilled labor. And so firms might just decide that it's better for them to pay higher equilibrium level wages. And so looking at answer choice A, firms pay efficiency wages, on the graph we would see the exact same thing. We would still see that price is above equilibrium level contributing to unemployment. And if this is contributing to structural unemployment, we know the natural rate of unemployment is going to be high as well. And so A is not going to be the answer. And so all three reasons, or all three theories for why structural unemployment might exist are going to not be the answer in our question here, because our question is looking for when unemployment is low, and the directional effects of A, B, and C are all to increase unemployment rather than decrease it. And so we know that none of the factors we talk about relating to structural unemployment really kind of are at play here in this question. And so we're going to turn to the other category within natural rate of unemployment, which is frictional unemployment. And what we said before is that frictional rate of unemployment is affected by things that affect the job search process. And so one of those things is unemployment insurance. And so unemployment insurance refers to payouts by the government to individuals who are unemployed while they're looking for a job. And so they might be given as a percentage of your pre-unemployment wages, or they might be given for a certain amount of time, for 6 weeks or 8 weeks. And so what unemployment insurance effectively does is it functions as a safety net, right, for people who lose their jobs. But what it also does is it lowers motivation for people to actually go out and find the right job for them, right? Because even without looking for that job that they might end up having, these people who are receiving unemployment benefits are actually getting paid even though they don't have a job. And so that tends to decrease the incentive to find a job, decrease incentive to go out and search for jobs on job forums and contact recruiters, because the cost of being unemployed is actually a little bit lower due to unemployment insurance. If we were to lower unemployment insurance benefits, as choice D suggests, what this essentially does is it reduces the safety net for people who are unemployed, but it increases the incentive for these people to go out and find a job, and basically shortens the job search process. Somebody on high unemployment insurance benefits might take 10 weeks to find a job, whereas someone with low unemployment insurance benefits might only take 8 weeks to find a job or 7 weeks to find a job. And so if we shorten the job search process, that's going to decrease frictional unemployment, as less people are going through that process of looking for the right job. And if we decrease frictional unemployment, we're also going to decrease the natural rate of unemployment. So D is going to be the right answer. The natural rate of unemployment tends to be lower when unemployment insurance benefits are lower. Hopefully that all makes sense. I know we talked about that quite in depth. I just think it's good to understand all the things that we're talking about in this question, because unemployment tends to just focus around some of these definitions and some of these root theories. And if we can understand all of those things, you guys will have no trouble with any kind of problem relating to unemployment. Let's take a look at the previous tutor's answer. So the previous tutor also wrote D, unemployment insurance benefits are lower. And they wrote that the natural rate of unemployment is the aggregate of frictional and structural unemployment during a given time frame. That's correct. Indeed, even a healthy economy will have this level of unemployment in light of the fact that laborers are continually going back and forth searching for better occupations, i.e. frictional unemployment, and there always exists some kind of structural unemployment where workers are unable to fill the available positions because of a lack of skill or a geographic barrier. For the most part, the natural rate of unemployment tends to be lower in nations that have less liberal social welfare payments, a more prominent level of work portability, higher worker participation rates, lower minimum wages, more vulnerable worker associations, and progressively adaptable genuine wage rates. So I think it's a good answer. It covers the definitions of frictional and structural unemployment. I think the answer could be a little bit better if it kind of indicated the factors in which, like for example, which of these answer choices is associated with which type of unemployment. And we know A through C are associated with structural unemployment, and D is associated with frictional unemployment. So if we can just add that in, that would make this question a lot easier to understand. And so, okay, add in, there are three common rationales that are provided for why structural unemployment exists. 1, minimum wages. 2, labor unions. And 3, efficiency wages. Answers A, B, and C are all reasons why structural unemployment would be higher. Therefore, they would increase the natural rate of unemployment rather than decrease them. And then we can say unemployment benefits. Unemployment insurance affects the job search process, which is what characterizes frictional unemployment by lowering unemployment insurance benefits. Government increases the incentive for workers to speed up their job search process and thereby decreases both frictional and the natural rate of unemployment. So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense, kind of going along the same line of thought that I explained when we were going through this question, clarifying exactly why each of these reasons might be wrong and why this reason is right. And so that way we can add that into kind of this more general definition of what are frictional and structural unemployment. So the solution is correct, we're just kind of clarifying. some of the answers. Okay, so the next question talks about, next question says, fiscal policies establish a government's plan for taxation and blank. And so when we think about fiscal policy, what we're really doing is we're dealing with things that government can do, specifically control both either spending or taxing, right? And this is in contrast to monetary policy. Monetary policy is action by the Federal Reserve, and that action is going to either do something that would affect the money supply, right? And that could be through banks, or that can be through open market operations, etc. So what we have here for fiscal policy is we know that the first factor, taxation, has already been given to us, and we would assume that the next factor would be something along the lines of government spending, and that is the other thing that is used by fiscal policy, used by the government engaging in fiscal policy to either expand or contract the government, the economy. And so let's take a look at the answer choice provided. Public spending. So yes, public spending, government spending, the same thing. That would be the right answer. The previous year's answer also clarifies there are two major tools of fiscal policy, namely taxes and public spending, and it is an economic policy that's concerned with the taxation and spending policies of the government. In other words, it is known as a sister strategy to monetary policy regulated by the Monetary Authority. Fiscal policy is associated with the monitoring of tax rates that can influence the growth rate of the economy by implementing a contractionary or expansionary fiscal policy in an economy. It also tells about the crucial role of government spending in the economy's growth. So yeah, it's pretty accurate. All you really have to understand is that fiscal policy usually deals with either taxing or spending, and monetary policy deals with the money supply. So yeah, good answer. I don't think there's anything else here that we really need to clarify. So the next question says, the blank rate is the interest rate that banks charge each other for borrowing or storing money. One is Federal Reserve interest, two is loan interest, three is the federal funds rate, and four is none of the above. And so, I think this is really just a definition-based question. If we just have to be very familiar with the terms for some of the tools that monetary policy. And so if we're familiar with those definitions, we know that the answer here is going to be three. The federal funds rate is the interest rate that banks charge each other for borrowing or storing money. And so this is kind of the idea that one bank might need to borrow money from another bank. And so the question is, we go to a bank for a loan. Who does the bank go for loans? So the question can either be they take out loans from other banks, or they can take out a loan from the Fed. And so if you take out a loan from the other bank, obviously the bank is still going to charge interest. And there's a special interest rate that banks charge each other for borrowing or storing money, and that is the federal funds rate. So that's something that is regulated by the Federal Reserve, as they are the central monetary body. And so they will set the federal funds rate in a way so that it will kind of accomplish the approximate effect on the money supply that the Federal Reserve is trying to aim for. There's also something that is often confused. I think even when I was first learning this, I was also confused, is the difference between the federal funds rate and the discount rate. So it's important to note that the federal funds rate is the interest rate that banks are charging each other, whereas the discount rate is the rate at which people are charging banks. The rate at which the Fed is charging banks for overnight loans that you're taking directly from the Federal Reserve deposit. And so those are two slightly different things. And so just remember the difference of those when we're talking about the definitions. Okay, let's take a look at the previous year's answers. So previous year says the federal funds rate as well. And they say that the federal funds rate is the interest at which banks and other depository institutions extend loans to each other on an uncollateralized basis overnight. Reserve balances are held by banks and the Federal Reserve to maintain their reserve requirements. Banks with surplus reserve balance in their accounts lend funds to those who are under a deficit. The interest rates charged on such loans is known as the federal funds rate. The federal funds rate is a crucial instrument of the Federal Reserve's monetary policy and is utilized to influence the money supply in the market. Yeah, so this is a great kind of covering the basis. All we really had to know here was the definition. We don't have to really understand how the mechanism by which this affects the money supply. So this is a good enough answer for the purposes of this question. Okay. Next question says, a binding price ceiling creates A, shortage and leads to non-price rationing. B, surplus and leads to non-price rationing. C, surplus and increases revenue for the government. And D, shortage and so quantity supplied will increase in the long run. So for the best way to think about price ceilings and price floors, in my opinion, is just to draw one out either in our head or referring to it online. Sorry, not online. Referring to it on an actual graph. Let's see if I can connect this. Okay, I think my pen is dead. I'll just use the mouse. So first thing we're doing here is we're drawing our graph. We have demand, we have supply, and we have our binding price ceiling. So price ceiling is a price set by the government in which they say that the price can be no higher than this level. And binding means that it is a price ceiling that actually does something, which means it has to be set below the equilibrium price, right? So we see here that this is the equilibrium price, right? We're right. P star. And the next thing we're going to write is a binding price ceiling, so a ceiling anywhere lower than P star, right? So let's say P1. And so what we have here is we have a surplus, right? Demand is too high. This is quantity demanded right here, and this is quantity supplied right here. And so we know that demand is too high, and that is creating what we know as a shortage, right? There's not enough supply of whatever this good is to fulfill the quantity demanded at this price level. And so the effect of this is going to be something along the lines of non-price rationing. So non-price rationing is best understood as something like queuing, where people are kind of getting in line to buy a certain product. They are first products are being sold not on a who wants it basis, but on a first come first serve basis. And so all these things are results of a shortage in a certain market that we're talking about here, right? And so that's what we're dealing with on the price side. So that's going to give us the answer choice A. A binding price ceiling creates a shortage and leads to non-price rationing. And we can take a look at the answer that the previous tutor said. They said the correct answer is A. A binding price ceiling is set at a price below the equilibrium price. It has the effect of creating a shortage since suppliers may be unwilling to supply the same quantity as with the equilibrium price. This is because they will receive less than the equilibrium price. Answer B is incorrect because that is the opposite effect of a binding price ceiling. So I think this question almost accurately describes the effect. They describe the effect of creating a shortage on suppliers, but is kind of an interaction of price with both supply and demand. So I think that's one thing we're going to correct. So we're going to say a binding price ceiling creates a shortage because it limits the price to a level below the equilibrium. A lower price means that suppliers are willing to supply less quantity and consumers are going to demand higher quantities. This shift from equilibrium, best seen on a graph, is going to result in a gap between quantity demanded and quantity supplied that is equal to a shortage. Great. And so otherwise the solution is correct. We find no problem with that, and we're going to move on to the next question. So the next question says, which of the following best describes the efficiency of monopolistically competitive firms? And so the answer choice A says allocatively efficient but productively inefficient. 2 says neither allocatively nor productively efficient. C says allocatively inefficient but productively efficient. D says both allocatively efficient and productively efficient. And so this question is first testing, do we know what the market structure of monopolistic competition is? And second, what is the difference between allocative efficiency and productive efficiency? And so the first thing we have to know is the market structure for a monopolistically competitive firm. I believe the previous tutor had included a chart, so we're just going to use theirs, so it's much prettier. And so this is kind of a good indication of what monopolistic competition looks like. So the big differentiating factor is that we have both an average revenue curve, which is kind of like a demand curve, and then we also have a marginal revenue curve, which is a more steeper version of the average revenue curve. And so the reason that monopolistically competitive firms face this type of curve is because they have a certain level of market power due to the fact that in monopolistic competition you have small firms that produce slightly differentiated goods rather than homogeneous goods. And so that means that if a firm wants to sell more of a good, they have to decrease their price, and that not only decreases how much they get for this new good, but also how much they get for all the goods they've been selling up to that point. And so that lower slope is going to give us a lower marginal revenue. And so in terms of price optimization, what we're going to see happen for a firm in a monopolistically competitive market is that they're going to produce where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue, which is going to be right over here at C1, Q1. And then that you're going to price, however, at Q1's kind of corresponding point on the demand curve, which would be at P1. And so this is how you decide what quantity, and then they move up to the demand curve, and that is the price that they charge. And what results is this square of profits in the short run, where they're actually able to earn positive economic profits as opposed to zero economic profit in this monopolistically competitive market. And so that's kind of a really big refresher on what the structure for monopolistic competition looks like. And so hopefully that is kind of familiar to you guys. So the question is this allocatively efficient or productively efficient? And what do those things actually mean? So allocative efficiency refers to the idea that goods are being produced at the societally optimal level, where you maximize a surplus to both consumers and producers. And so what's really happening here is that we have a certain level of deadweight loss. This triangle right here is going to be our deadweight loss because we know that we are giving producers higher levels of producer surplus, but we've reduced the level of consumer surplus and we lose a certain level of productivity. Allocative efficiency is basically maximized when you have a perfectly competitive market at equilibrium, right? If we have a graph of perfect competition on the left, where we have our demand and our supply. If we just are producing at this point here, all of this area becomes surplus, and that maximizes our allocative efficiency. So anytime we deviate away from a perfectly competitive equilibrium, such as in the case of a monopolistic competitive firm, we are deviating away from allocative efficiency because this is the only maximum allocatively efficient point. Okay, so we know it's not allocatively efficient, but what about productive efficiency? And productive efficiency essentially says that we should be producing at a point in which costs are minimized. And so basically where the average cost is lowest. And so in a productive, in a regular market, we would see that maybe we would have a production point that is at the minimum level of average cost. And so we can see here right now that's around here. But we are not at this point where average cost is minimized, and so we are at another point over here where average cost is relatively low, but is not at the minimum point. And so if you're producing at a point that is not at the minimum of the average cost, then you're also not producing at a productively efficient point because the cost of production is not minimized to the maximum extent, right? And so our final answer is going to be that it is the effect of monopolistic competition is that firms are neither allocatively nor productively efficient. And so that's going to be the answer choice that we choose. So let's take a look at the answer or rationale given by the previous tutor. So the previous tutor said, neither allocatively efficient nor productively efficient, which is good. And they said, a monopolistically competitive market is an imperfect market structure comprising of a large number of small firms that produce and supply differentiated goods in the market. The products supplied by firms cannot be substituted for each other due to their heterogeneity, which is opposed to their homogeneity. This grants a small market power to sellers with which they gain a portion of the market share that is unaffected when they charge a price of their own. Since goods cannot be perfectly substituted, the demand curve that firms face becomes downward sloping. As a consequence, the price charged by each firm is unique and does not correspond to the perfectly competitive price level. The price in perfect competition is equal to a minimum average total cost in the long run, which is also equal to marginal revenue and average revenue for a firm in the short run. However, in a monopolistically competitive firm, the price is established at a point on the average revenue curve corresponding to a profit maximizing level of the intersection of marginal cost and marginal revenue due to the downward slope. Hence, the market ceases to be productively or allocatively efficient. So I think that hits the nail kind of on the head. The only thing that could really make this answer a little bit better is if we specifically defined allocatively and productively efficient, right? Because if we don't know what those things are, we can't answer this question. So we're just going to add that definition in, and otherwise it should be good. So allocative efficiency is maximized when a market is at perfectly competitive equilibrium, because that is the point in which total surplus to society is maximized. And then meanwhile, productive efficiency is maximized when producing at the minimum average total cost. As seen in the graph, a monopolistically competitive market deviates from the perfectly competitive equilibrium and does not produce at the minimum ETC. Therefore, it is neither allocatively nor productively efficient. Okay, so it looks like I have some typos, so we'll go over those real quickly. Yeah, I think this is just like things, this is random, I typo. So otherwise than that, like this answer choice is gonna give us the definitions for both allocative and productive efficiency, and then allow us to kind of more effectively get to the answer that is right here. So we're gonna say if solution is correct, so I'm just gonna clarify with that. Okay. '28 says a Nash equilibrium occurs when A, each player takes the best possible action given the other player's action. B, you cooperate until the other player cheats and then you cheat forever. C, there is a clear strategy for each player independent of the other player's actions. And D, each player complies with the collusive agreement. Or E, none of the above. And so this is kind of a theory in game theory, the idea of Nash equilibrium, and it refers to a situation in which you have multiple players that you might see in, for example, an oligopoly, and each firm is going to have certain strategies they can take, and those strategies are going to affect the payoffs that that each firm is going to see when we are dealing with Nash equilibrium. So I think this is best observed if we look at a prisoner's dilemma payoff matrix. So why don't we take a look at that really quickly? And so, right, so this is something that we refer to as the prisoner's dilemma. And so if we can put that on the right here. So right, so this is prisoner's dilemma, right? So I think this is the best. I'm going to give some background for game theory and Nash equilibrium in case this is your first introduction to this topic. And so that way it'll be easy to see what the right answer here is here, right? So prisoner's dilemma says, you and a friend commit a crime and you both get arrested for it. And so you're put into separate interrogation rooms, and you're both given a choice to either cooperate with the this is a weird way to phrase it. Right. So let's say you're given a choice to either cooperate with the police, and you can basically tattle on your friend who also committed the crime with you, and you say exactly what you guys did, and so that's one thing you can do. Or you can defect, and what defect means is that you basically refuse to say anything, you don't cooperate with the police, and you hope that your friend did not cooperate with the police, right? And so the question here is your outcome is going to depend on what your partner also decides to do, right? So let's say you decide to cooperate with the police and you want to spill the beans, and then the other your friend also decides they want to cooperate with the police. What's going to happen is that in this hypothetical scenario, you both get sentenced to 3 years in jail. Okay. Now, let's say you decide to cooperate, but your friend decides to stay silent, so you basically tattle on them and they say nothing. So they're going to take the full blame for the crime, and you get 0 years in jail, and they get 5 years in jail. And then, so the same happens for you. So let's say you decide you don't want to tattle, you want to stay quiet, and they decide to tattle. Then you get 5 years in jail, and your partner gets 0 years in jail. And finally, if you both decide to stay quiet, then you have you both decide to stay quiet, nobody says anything, and then you both get sentenced to just 1 year in jail. And so that is going to be the kind of general kind of the setup for why you would see Nash equilibrium occurring. And so I'm trying to find maybe a little bit better of a answer. So right. So I think this question actually incorrectly identifies Nash equilibrium as here rather than here. I think maybe we just have a different hypothetical scenario. So let me bring up this one right here. Right, so this is going to be a better kind of depiction of the scenario we're talking about. And so what we see here is, again, you can confess or lie. You both confess, you get 8 years. If you lie, and if you confess and they lie, you get 0 years and they get 10 years. If you lie and they confess, you get 10 years. If you both lie, you both only get 1 year, right? So the best strategy here, right, for you guys the best outcome, if you could coordinate, is for you both to lie and you both get 1 year in jail, right? Because that would reduce how much what you were likely to do, given the other person's choice, right? So what Nash equilibrium tells us, however, is that the actual outcome is going to be -8, -8, and that is a Nash equilibrium for this scenario. And the way we can look at this is if we break it down into kind of different decisions. So let's say we're prisoner 1, right? So let's assume that the other person is going to confess, right? What would we prefer to do if we knew that the other person was going to confess, right? So we would choose to between confessing, which would give us 8 years in jail, or lying, which would give us 10 years in jail. So obviously, we'd rather spend 8 years in jail than 10 years in jail. So if we knew that the other person was going to confess, we would also choose to confess, right? Okay. Now, let's say we knew that the other person was going to lie, right? What would we do? So we could either confess or lie. Confessing would give us 0 years in jail, and lying would give us 1 year in jail. So if we knew that the other person was going to lie, we would also choose to confess. And what that means is that confession is actually a dominant strategy for prisoner 1. Like, regardless of what prisoner 2 does, either if he confesses or if he lies, we would rather confess than lie. And the same goes for prisoner 2. If he knew that we were going to confess, he would choose to confess. If we knew that we were going to lie, he would choose to confess, right? And so both people have a dominant strategy of confession, and therefore, no matter what the other person does, they would choose to confess. And that's why we would see that confession is actually, a mutual confession with 8 years in jail is actually going to be the Nash equilibrium where this game theory problem actually ends up, even if there is a better outcome if we had both coordinated and we had both chosen to lie, right? And so that is the idea of Nash equilibrium. And so basically says, Nash equilibrium occurs if you have a clear strategy that you can take, assuming that the other person does not change their strategy. And so in terms of the answer choices here, it's going to be answer choice C that best kind of explains that relationship. There's a clear strategy for each player independent of the other player's actions. And so here we see that it's going to be confession is that clear strategy, and that's going to be what Nash equilibrium refers to. So I know this explanation, again, probably kind of took a little bit long, it was a little bit long-winded, but I think understanding prisoner's dilemma, understanding a little bit of game theory is going to make your life a whole lot easier if you're trying to solve questions related to this concept. So let's take a look at the previous tutor's answer. So the previous tutor said the correct answer is C. Nash equilibrium is a concept within game theory where the optimal outcome of a game is where there is no incentive to deviate from their initial strategy. In other words, no players have an incentive to deviate from their chosen strategy after considering an opponent's choice. So yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. And if you want to understand Nash equilibrium, look up videos or explanations online about game theory and prisoner's dilemma. Let's put dilemma wrong? Dilemma, oops. But the solution is correct, it is C. So that's going to be that, and then so we're going on to the next question. So the next question says, when quantity demanded decreases in response to a change in price, what happens? And so, we know that basically, okay, so let's read through the answer choices. So 1 says the demand curve shifts to the right, 2 says the demand curve shifts to the left, 3 says there's a movement down the demand curve, down along the demand curve, 4 says there's a movement up along the demand curve, and 5 says the supply curve shifts to the right. And so what we're dealing with here is changes in quantity demanded. And so we know that there are either one of two things. There's either going to be price as a shift along the curve, or there's going to be demand determinants. And so those are things that shift the curve overall. And that is the big two things that we're talking about, right? So if we can draw this on the right, oops, what's going on here? I guess it's not like us draw. Turn on draw. That's not what I wanted to do. There we go. Okay, there we go. So we can either have our demand curve here, and we can say we're shifting somewhere from along this curve. So if price is high, we have that demand quantity demanded. If price decreases, we would have a shift along the demand curve, right? Or we could have a shift of the entire demand curve. And so that's something like this if we shift to the right, or we can shift to the left, right? So basically, what does a change in price result in? And so we know that changes in any of the demand determinants, whether it be prices of a substitute, prices of a complement, prices, whether it be income change or something like that, those are going to shift the overall demand curve, and that's going to be what we see on the right. However, a change in quantity demanded relative to price, that's simply a shift along the demand curve, because as according to the law of demand, the only thing that the demand curve really depicts is the relationship between price and quantity demanded. So if something's changing, you're just moving along the curve because that's the relationship depicted on the curve. And so with that in mind, what we know is that if quantity demanded decreases in response to a change in price, that means you're going from a high quantity demanded on the right to a low quantity demanded on the left, something like this. What you're going to see is that price has actually increased. We're moving up along the demand curve, and that's going to be an increase in price. And so the correct answer here is a movement up along the demand curve, answer choice 4, and that is what happens when quantity demanded decreases in response to a change in price. So keep this relationship in mind. This should be a pretty straightforward question for us. So taking a look at the answer choices, it says, taking a look at the previous tutor's answer, they said 4 as well. There's a movement up along the demand curve, and they said a change in the price of a good leads to an inverse change in quantity demanded according to the law of demand that asserts that a decrease in price leads to an increase in quantity demanded of a good or service, and an increase in price leads to a decrease, provided all other factors that influence demand remain constant. Quantity demanded is a function of price. The change in quantity demanded is represented by a movement along the demand curve and not a shift, as it is merely a shift from one price to another, followed by a shift in the consumer bundle due to a change in the purchasing power of the consumer. A change in price that causes the quantity demanded to decrease will lead to a movement in the upward direction along the demand curve. So yeah, pretty good. Kind of just many explanations for the same relationship. Maybe it could have been a little bit shorter, but otherwise this answer covers all the reasons why we would see this relationship between price and demand, quantity demanded. It's a good answer. So the next question says, which of the following statements about GDP is correct? And one says nominal GDP values production at constant prices, whereas real GDP values production at current prices. 2 says nominal GDP values production at market prices, whereas real GDP values production at the cost of the resources used in the production process. 3 says nominal GDP consistently underestimates the value of production, whereas real GDP consistently overestimates the value of production. And 4 says nominal GDP values production at current prices, whereas real GDP values production at constant prices. And so, this is question, judging by the answer choice, is really just asking us what is the difference between nominal and real GDP. And the answer is that nominal GDP is given as a combination of price and production. So if 10 units were produced and each of those units cost $10, then nominal GDP would just multiply current prices by the production of that year and sum up all of that, and that would give you nominal GDP. The difference is that changes in the nominal GDP, you're not sure if those reflect changes in production level, which is what we care about, or if they reflect simply changes in price. Right? Let's say something used to cost $10 last year, and this year it only costs $5. Well, that's going to decrease GDP by half if even if production remained the same. And so, specifically nominal GDP, excuse me. And so, there's a potential that fluctuations in nominal GDP are simply fluctuations in prices rather than production. And so, to control for that and to make sure that what we're looking at when we see changes in GDP is really changes in the value of production rather than the prices of at current levels, we're going to take a look at real GDP. And real GDP holds production prices at constant levels given a base year. So let's say we only care about prices as they were last year, regardless if this is this year, last year, or the year before. And so all prices are going to be a price for a loaf of bread is going to be $5 no matter what, even if this year it's $7 or $4. We're going to hold it constant at $5, and we only care about changes in production quantity, right? And so in that sense, real GDP is controlling or keeping prices constant and ensuring that changes in real GDP are reflections of changes in overall changes in overall production. So, looking through your answer choices, it looks like 4 is going to be the statement about GDP that is correct. Nominal GDP values production at current prices, whereas real GDP values production at constant prices. And that's going to be the big distinguishing factor for that, for nominal versus real. So let's take a look at the previous tutor's answer. So they said 4 as well. Nominal GDP values production at current prices, whereas real GDP values production at constant prices. And they say that the GDP of a country is the aggregate of the value of all final goods and services produced by an economy in a period, usually a year, in its domestic territory. Measurement of GDP involves a summation of values added by economic agents in a year to the economy or of incomes they received for a contribution to the output generation. The value that is calculated at current prices is known as nominal GDP. This figure is adjusted for inflation to reflect real economic growth, which is a result of output increase and not increase in the price level. It is known as real GDP. Real GDP values production at constant prices, i.e. the prices of a base year with relatively stable prices. So I think this answer is a little bit long and a little bit confusing. I think we can write a little bit better of an explanation here just to clarify the differences between real and nominal. So we can say that nominal GDP is calculated using both current prices and production levels. As a result, changes in nominal GDP could be a result of either changes in prices or changes in production level. Because this can be confusing because we care mostly about changes in production level, not price level. Real GDP solves this problem by keeping prices constant using a base year's prices for all relevant calculations. There, i.e. valuing production at constant prices. So this is going to be a little bit better of an answer, just kind of clarifying the answer given here. I think some of it was good, and others I think a little bit confusing. So hopefully this makes a little bit more sense. So let's take a look at the next question. So the next question says, economic profit equals total revenue minus which of the following? And so it says A, the cost of resources bought in the market, B, the implicit rental rate, C, the cost of resources owned by the firm, D, the cost of resources supplied by the owner, and E, the opportunity cost of production. So what we really have to understand here is that there's two ways of looking at profit. There's economic profit and there's accounting profit. And so accounting profit is simply on a balance sheet. How is profit calculated? It's calculated by total revenue minus total costs, right? Specifically explicit costs, right? That might be something like resources used or rent or wages paid to workers, etc. Economic profit is the way that economists look at these things, and this is kind of going back to some of the basic kind of principles that we talk about in the beginning of most economics courses. And that is the idea of opportunity cost, the idea that every decision has trade-off, and your costs are not just what the explicit costs that you incur, but also the implicit things that you give up when you engage in certain activity. And so economic profit is going to equal total revenue minus the opportunity cost of production. So that's answer choice E. Let's take a look at the previous tutor's answer. They also picked E. The correct answer is E. Economic profit equals a firm's total revenues less its total economic costs. Economic costs are the sum of cash outflows and opportunity costs, aka the opportunity cost of production. Excuse me. And so yes, that is the correct answer. That's a good, I think very concise, good, concise answer. And that's great. Okay, let's take a look at this next question. It says, Gomez runs a small pottery firm. He hires one helper at $12,000 per year, pays annual rent of $5,000 for his shop, and spends $20,000 per year on materials. He has $40,000 of his own funds invested in equipment, pottery wheels, kilns, and so forth that could earn him $4,000 a year if alternatively invested. He has been offered $15,000 per year to work as a potter for a competitor. He estimates his entrepreneurial talents are worth $3,000 per year. Total annual revenue from pottery sales is $72,000. Calculate the accounting profit and the economic profit for Gomez. And so let's take a look at this question here. And so what we can really see happening here is that we're dealing with accounting profit first and then economic profit second. So like we said before, accounting profit refers to total revenue minus explicit costs. And so for total revenue here, we have total annual revenue from pottery sales is $72,000. So you have $72,000 minus, and then we have explicit costs. So let's start from the top. He hires one helper at $12,000 per year. So that's wages. So that's the explicit cost. He pays annual rent of $5,000. Another explicit cost. Right, this is money he has to pay. And then spends $20,000 per year on materials. So again, cost of materials, that's explicit costs. Is there anything else? He has $40,000 of his own funds invested in equipment, but that that's not stuff that's not cash outflow that stays in his business, and so that's not going to be considered an explicit cost. It could earn him $4,000 per year. That's opportunity cost, not an explicit cost, more of an implicit cost. Has been offered $15,000 per year. Alternatively, that's an implicit cost, not an explicit cost. He estimates his entrepreneurial talents are worth $3,000 per year. Not really an explicit cost either. That's not $3,000 that's leaking the business. And so this is going to be our total calculation for accounting profit. And so we have $72,000 minus $12,000 plus $5,000 plus $20,000. So this is going to give us a total of $37,000. So $72,000 minus $37,000 is going to give us $72,000 minus $37,000 is giving us $35,000, right? So $35,000 is his economic profit. Accounting profit. And so that is the actual balance sheet profit that he is making every year. So the next question is, okay, so that's his accounting profit. What is his economic profit? So his economic profit is going to be everything that we subtract from accounting profit minus his opportunity costs. So accounting profit minus opportunity costs. So we have $35,000. And what are his opportunity costs? So one thing is he could invest his $40,000 alternatively, and that's earning him $4,000 per year. And so that's one opportunity cost. He also knows that he could be working as a potter for his competitor instead of working at his own firm, and that would earn him $15,000. So this is something he also gives up. And finally, he estimates his entrepreneurial talents are worth $3,000 per year, and so it's possible that that would earn him some sort. I don't believe that would really contribute to his because alternatively, if he's working as a potter for a competitor, he's not going to be really needing entrepreneurial talents, right? He's not running the firm. He's just working for somebody else. And so it's possible that if that's value that's already included in the $15,000 that his competitor would be paying him. So I don't think that would be considered direct opportunity cost. So we're going to cut it off there. So it's going to be $35,000 minus $19,000, and that's going to give us about $16,000. That's going to be his economic profit. Ooh, this says economic cost here. Economic profit, right? So that's going to be kind of our two calculations here. So let's take a look at the previous tutor's answers, right? So we came up with accounting profit of $35,000 and economic profit of $16,000. So the first thing that the previous tutor says is they identified the explicit costs, $12,000 for the helper, $5,000 for rent, and $20,000 for material. So that's what we did here as well. Their implicit costs are $4,000 of foregone interest and $15,000 of foregone salary and $3,000 of entrepreneurship. So again, I'm not sure about that $3,000. We might make a note of that in the explanation for why we didn't include that. And so we have accounting profit is equal to $72,000 minus 37, giving us $35,000 here, right? His gross income is $72,000, so his net is $72,000 minus $37,000, giving us $35,000. So that's his accounting profit. His economic profit is equal to this accounting profit minus $22,000 of implicit costs. For us, it was $19,000. So he says if he could sell his equipment for $40,000, a big maybe, and invest it and get a $4,000 return, and then go to work for his competitor and be paid $15,000, then his income will be $19,000. His entrepreneurial net talents may or may not make him money in his new job. The competitor who's made him his offer thinks he is worth $15,000, so that presumably is his estimate of Gomez's total worth, including his entrepreneurial talents. Yeah, so in that case, you wouldn't actually include the $3,000 separately, right? So that's one thing we're going to note. So what Gomez has to decide is would he rather work for himself and make $35,000 per year, or for the other guy and make $19,000 per year. Right. So I mean, it's not really. I mean, this is a question, I guess, that you can decide. But again, you don't want to compare accounting profit to economic profit, right? Like that is not the way. You want to be comparing economic profit for both, right? And so you would simply be talking about how this is influencing your decision based on what is going on with the overall opportunity cost of your decision making, right? And so the one thing we're going to decide to maybe change or amend is this idea of the $3,000, right? So if the competitor estimates Gomez's total worth, including entrepreneurial talent, to be total worth, including entrepreneurial talent, to be $15,000, then we would not double count the $3,000 additionally in the implicit cost calculation. This would result in an economic profit of $16,000 rather than $19,000. It just depends on what assumptions you make when answering the question. Okay, otherwise the solution is correct, I would say. Okay, so let's take a look at this next question. It says, assume the banks do not hold excess reserves and that households do not hold currency, so the only form of money is demand deposits. To simplify the analysis, suppose the banking system has total reserves of $400. Determine the money multiplier and the money supply for each. Sorry, let me just mute this. Assume that the banks do not hold excess reserves and that, determine the money multiplier and the money supply for each reserve requirement listed in the following table. And so what we first have is reserve requirement percentages of 20 and 10, and then we want to fill in the rest for simple money multiplier and money supply. So first, simple money multiplier given, let's say, reserve requirement of 20%. The money multiplier is given by 1 divided by reserve ratio, and so 20% is 0.2. 1 divided by 0.2 is going to give us 5, right? And so that's going to be our first money multiplier, and then money supply is going to be deposits times the money multiplier. So 400 times 5 is going to give us 2,000. With a 10% reserve requirement, we have 1 divided by 0.1, so we get 10, and then we get 400 times 10, so 4,000. And so what we know here is that a higher reserve requirement is associated with a blank money supply. So if reserve requirement increases from 10 to 20, then money supply decreases. So a higher reserve requirement is associated with a lower money supply, or a smaller money supply. Okay. Suppose the Federal Reserve wants to increase the money supply by $200. Again, you can assume the banks do not hold excess reserves and that households do not hold currency. If the reserve requirement is 10%, so we're dealing with this bottom row here, the Fed will use open market operations to blank worth of U.S. government bonds. And so basically saying we want the end result on the money supply to be an increase by $200. And so what the money multiplier tells us is that 10% reserve requirements, it would only require an increase in deposits by $20 in order for there to be a $200 increase in the money supply, right? Because our money multiplier is 10. 200 divided by 10 is 10. So if we want to increase, 200 divided by 10 is 20, not 10. All the Fed really has to do is increase deposits by $20. And to do that, they would, if they're increasing deposits, they are buying open micro operations. So you would want to buy it froze a little bit. Yeah, so you would want to buy $20 of open market operations, and that would increase the money supply by $200. Now, suppose that rather than immediately lending out all excess reserves, banks began holding some excess reserves due to uncertain economic conditions. Specifically, bank increases the percentage of deposits held as reserves from 10% to 25%. This increase in the reserve ratio causes the money multiplier to blank. So if the reserve ratio goes from 10 to 25, our new multiplier goes from 10 to 1 divided by 0.25, so 10 to 4, right? So it's going to decrease the money multiplier, cause the money multiplier to decrease to 4. Under these conditions, the Fed would need to blank worth of the U.S. government bonds in order to increase the money supply by 200. So if the end goal is to increase the money supply by 200, we would need to just increase deposits by 200 divided by 4, which is what, 50, right? And so under these conditions, the Fed would need to buy $50 worth of government's bonds or to increase the money supply by 200. Which of the following statements help to explain why in the real world the Fed cannot precisely control the money supply? Check all that apply. Number 1, the Fed cannot control the amount of money that households choose to hold as currency. That is true, right? And so if households choose to hold more money as currency, then the money supply will be smaller than we normally think it is. Because they're not putting it into banks as deposits, right? So that's one thing that is going to mean that the Fed cannot precisely control money supply. B says the Fed cannot prevent banks from lending out required reserves. Again, this is cannot prevent banks. So this is false, right? The Fed can prevent banks from lending out required reserves. They are, as the word might imply, required, and so they're regulated by law and to make sure that they have these amounts of money in reserves. So they can't lend out money that is required to reserves. They can lend out money in excess reserves. So anything affecting excess reserves is out of the control of the Fed, and I think that's what. Number 3, the Fed cannot control whether and to what extent banks hold excess reserves. That is something that is out of control of the Fed, so that is going to prevent the Fed from precisely controlling the money supply. If the banks hold excess money reserves, as we see in this scenario where we have increase in the percentage of deposits held in reserves from 10 to 25%, not as a result of Fed policy, but as a result of just excess reserves, that's going to imperfectly affect the money supply, and we would see that change as well. So let's say answer choices 1 and 3 are what we would check off for that question here. So hopefully this process makes sense, and we can take a look at the question, the answer given by the previous tutor. Well, so the previous tutor says, first, the reserve requirement is 20%, The money multiplier would be 5. That is what we have here. The money supply would be total reserves times the money multiplier, so 400 times 5, that gives us 2,000, so we're all good so far. And then we go to a reserve requirement of 10%. At 10%, simple money multiplier would be 1 divided by 0.1, so 10. The money supply is total reserves times the money multiplier, so 400 times 10, so 4,000. So we're all good there. As the above calculations show, a higher reserve requirement is associated with a lower, we said smaller money supply, so the same direction, so that's good. Assuming a reserve requirement of 0.1 and a simple money multiplier of 10, if you want to increase money supply by $200, that would be equal to an increase in total reserves times simple money multiplier. So $200 times an increase in $200 is equal to an increase in total reserves times 10. That means the increase in total reserves needed is 200 divided by 10, or 20. So we would have the Fed would want to increase the money supply by purchasing U.S. government bonds from banks. So buy $20 of open market operations. So that's the same thing that we said. And then they said in order to increase the money supply by $200, total reserves at banks has to be increased by $20. This means the Fed will have to buy $20 worth of U.S. government bonds to increase the total reserves by 20, which will lead to an increase in $200 in the money supply. So that's good. We're all good so far. If the reserve requirement is 10%, the Fed will use open market operations to purchase $20 worth of U.S. government bonds. Yep. Now assume the U.S. reserve requirement is now 25%. The simple money multiplier changes to 4. An increase in money multiplier is going to equal an increase in total reserves times simple money multiplier. $200 equals to total reserves increase times 4. Increase in total reserves is equal to 200 divided by 4, so 50. When the Fed wants to increase the money supply, it purchases U.S. government bonds from banks. In order to increase money supply by $200, total reserves at banks has to be increased by 50. This means the Fed will have to buy $50 worth of U.S. government bonds to increase the total reserves by 50, leading to an increase of $200 in the money supply. Thus, the increase in reserve ratio caused the money multiplier to decrease to 4, so that's what we said. Under these conditions, the Fed would need to buy $50, that's what we said as well, worth of U.S. government bonds in order to increase the money supply by $200. Now the last part, which are the things that prevent the Fed from accurately controlling the money supply. The Fed can only control the quantity of required reserves being held by the banks. It does not have any control over the quantity of money that households choose to hold as currency, as well as the quantity of excess reserves that banks choose to hold. This lack of control over these two components of money supply reduces the effectiveness of the Fed to precisely control the money supply. The correct options are 1 and 3. That is also what we said. So it looks like the previous tutor got it completely right? And we are in total agreement. Everything is correct. And we're going to mark that as correct. So that is kind of a rundown of some of the money supply aspects of monetary policy. Okay. Next question says, which statement best describes the impact of scarcity? 1, people are able to meet most of their needs. 2, consumers must pay higher prices for many items. 3, governments must try to meet the wants of citizens. And 4, economies can work to provide more goods and services. So scarcity, again, refers to the idea that, nothing is unlimited, everything is in a limited quantity. And so that forces people to make decisions and have trade-offs, right? You can't have everything, you have to decide what you want the most. Scarcity is also going to affect prices. The rarer something is, the more scarce something is, typically the more valuable it is, and the higher the price would be for it. And so answer choice 2 is going to look like the best answer choice. Consumers must pay higher prices for many items. And this is just because some items are more scarce. If everything was unlimited, you could get everything for free, right? If food was unlimited, if water was unlimited, if diamonds were unlimited, everything would be very cheap, even free, because there would be no competition between people to buy those goods. It's only when things are limited and things cost money that there must be higher prices. And so that's going to be the best answering choice here, I would say. So let's take a look at the previous tutor's answer. They said consumers must pay higher prices for many items. Scarcity is the fundamental problem of economics. Our needs and wants are theoretically limitless, and resources that have the ability to yield utility to fulfill our needs and wants are in limited supply. It's a really good kind of breakdown of what scarcity is. Scarcity refers to the finiteness of resources against our limitless wants. Scarcity necessitates an efficient allocation of resources to provide goods and services that are of the greatest benefits to us. Hence, all economic decisions are motivated by the rational idea of maximization of utility. The forces of supply and demand lead to the allocation of resources. Since some resources are scarcer than the others, their supply is relatively less, and hence they come at a higher price. Yeah, so pretty good answer choice here. Really defining scarcity pretty well. And yes, so good answer. Nothing wrong with that, I think. So I think we're all on the same page here. The next question. The next question says, a depository institution takes deposits from blank and earns most of its income by blank. So a depository institution is just like a commercial bank, right? And a commercial bank might be, Citibank, Capital One, PNC, Chase, any commercial bank which is not really investing the money that it receives, right? And so it's going to take deposits from, anybody, a lot of households, a lot of individuals, some firms. When we have a savings account, we're giving our savings and making a deposit into a depository institution, right? So that's where most of our funds are being made. And so then the question is, if the banks aren't reinvesting like investment banks are, not into like at least financial instruments, then how are commercial banks earning income? And so the way we do that is that they loan out the money to other people who are looking to borrow. So let's say someone else wants to start a business, they might go to a bank and ask for $1 million loan. And if the bank approves that loan, thinks that this business is going to be worthwhile, then the bank is going to provide, the person with $1 million and then charge them interest. And so the bank will eventually get the $1 million back plus interest earned on that. And so that's going to be the main way that these commercial or depository institutions are making money. So we're going to say a depository institution takes deposits from households, individuals, or firms and earns most of its income by loaning out money and earning interest on those loans. Taking a look at the previous tutor's answer choices, they said a depository institution takes deposits from firms and households and earns most of its income by extending loans from deposits at a higher interest rates than the one paid to depositors. Right, so I think that's a good point. It's not just about earning interest on your loans. You have to make sure that you earn higher interest on the loans that you give out compared to the interest that you pay on the deposits that people are giving to you, right? Because the only reason we would make a deposit into a depository institution is because they promise a certain level of interest return on our deposits, right? So every year you might be earning 0.5% or 1% on your checkings account or savings account. And that's a big reason, or maybe one of the reasons you would be depositing money. And so you have to make sure you make at least that much money off of the loans in order for you to make an income, right? Because otherwise you're losing money. So let's keep on looking at the previous tutor's answer. So he said a depository institution is one where individuals and firms deposit their money to earn interest payments. The institution uses the pool of money to lend assets to those in need. It grants interest payments to depositors only as it charges interest payments from borrowers for loans they take. The institution earns most of its income by buying securities and extending loans at an interest rate that is higher than the interest rate given by them to depositors. So yeah, pretty good. Good answer. Nothing really wrong with that answer there. Okay, so the next question says, high and unexpected inflation has a greater cost, A, for those who save than for those who borrow, B, for those who hold a little money than for those who hold a lot of money, C, for those whose wages increase by as much as inflation than for those who are paid a fixed nominal wage, or D, for savers in low-income tax brackets than for savers in high-income tax brackets. So high and unexpected inflation, right, is basically saying that prices have gone very high, maybe due to too much money or too much of an expansionary gap. Basically, prices are very high, and therefore the purchasing power of the dollar is lower. And so really high on inflation reduces the amount of value that you hold in your hands, right? And so that's going to have an impact on first and foremostly those who save and borrow, right? So if I save $1,000, right, and
let's say the average, you're in the economy and you can only buy one good, right? So that one good is good X. If I have $1,000 and the price of good X is $10, then I can buy 100 of good X, right? That's my purchasing power. My purchasing power is 100 units of good X. Now let's say inflation happens. High and unexpected inflation drives up the price of a good X from $10 to $100. That's a price change. It does not change how much money I have in savings at all, right? I still have exactly nominally $1,000 in savings. So that high unexpected inflation, which increased the price from $10 to $100, has basically decreased the amount of value or purchasing power that I have. Because now at $100, at high inflation, I can only buy 10 units, right? If each unit now of good X now costs $100, I can only buy 10 units with $1,000. Whereas before, I could buy 100 units. And so my purchasing power has decreased. And that hurts me, right? Having unexpected inflation has basically hurt me as a saver. On the other hand, let's assume now that we are a borrower. So I owe a bank $1,000. And so, let's say I borrowed $1,000 from the bank, and I used that $1,000 to invest in buying good X, and I had 100 units of good X. And I planned on selling good X later and using that to pay back my loans. So if a high and unexpected inflation occurs and prices go up, what that means is each dollar is worth less, right? And so when I return my loans for $1,000, I'm returning essentially the equivalent of 10 units of good X rather than 100 units of good X, which is what I could buy with it previously. And so as a borrower, I'm ecstatic, right? I have to return not only $1,000, but in terms of value, I return a tenth of the value that I borrowed from the bank. And so answer choice A is already going to get the nail on the head. High and unexpected inflation has a greater cost for those who save than for those who borrow, because those who save are adversely affected by the decrease in purchasing power, whereas those who borrow are beneficially affected by the decrease in purchasing power. So A is going to be the right answer. Let's take a look at the previous tutor's answer. So the previous tutor says, in economics, inflation is a parameter to check the continued increase in price. In the economy, there are expected inflation and unexpected inflation. If an increase in price is expected by the economic agent, that is expected inflation. On the other hand, if an increase in price is not expected by the economic agent, then that is unexpected inflation. So pretty straightforward stuff. Purchasing power is a concept that converts the money into the number of goods and services a person can afford. Purchasing power is reduced in the case of inflation because due to an increase in price, a person can afford less amounts of the good with the same level of income. The high and unexpected level of inflation affects savers more, and the borrowers are getting benefited due to lowering their borrowing amount. Right, so that's good. I think that last half is really the important point there. So specifically, the high inflation affects savers more by reducing their purchasing power. Meanwhile, the borrowers are benefited because they are being asked because their loans are now worth less amount of money, so they have to pay back less real value on their loans. So yeah, otherwise the solution is correct. We're just clarifying a little bit, and that's going to be our final answer there. So let's take a look at the next question. If the nation's labor force receives a significant influx of young workers, A, the natural rate of unemployment is unlikely to change. B, the natural rate of unemployment is likely to increase. C, frictional unemployment will likely decrease to 0. And D, the natural rate of unemployment is likely to decrease. And so all of these have to do with either natural or frictional unemployment. Again, remember what we talked about in the first question today. Natural rate of unemployment is the sum of frictional and structural unemployment. And so anything that is really affecting one of those is going to affect natural rate of unemployment. So the question is natural rate of unemployment affected at all? And if it is, what happens to it? Or maybe we're just talking about frictional unemployment. So C is the only answer that talks about frictional unemployment rather than natural rate of unemployment, so maybe we'll deal with that first. And C says frictional unemployment will likely decrease to 0. And again, we know that frictional unemployment has to deal with the job search process, and it's almost never zero, right? There's always going to be this problem, even in the best economy, where people are still going to go through that process of looking for the best job for them, right? So frictional unemployment is not likely to decrease to zero. We're not going to be picking for C. So the question is, how is natural rate of unemployment affected? And so, frictional rate of unemployment, so natural rate of unemployment, is it going to be impacted by an influx of young workers in terms of structural unemployment? That seems unlikely, right? Structural unemployment has to do with minimum wage laws, efficiency wages, unions, and so none of those really have any direct tie to an influx of young workers. However, the natural rate of unemployment, the frictional unemployment, however, might be affected by an influx of young workers. For example, young workers probably have never had a job before, so they might take a little bit longer to find the right job for them. That's going to increase frictional unemployment, thereby increasing the natural rate of unemployment. It's also possible that younger workers are going to have higher turnover, whereas older workers would have less turnover. Older workers might be more settled into their careers, and so they aren't going to be looking to change jobs as much. And so we're going to have low frictional unemployment, whereas young workers who are just getting started might be switching jobs every few years. And so that's going to lead to high turnover and high job searching and high frictional unemployment, thereby increasing the natural rate of unemployment. And so in both those senses, the natural rate of unemployment is likely to increase. And so we're going to pick B for our best answer here. So let's take a look at the previous tutor's answer. So this previous tutor says, in economics, the labor force includes all the people who are able and willing to do a job, regardless if they are employed or not. In simple words, the labor force includes both employed and unemployed workers. The unemployment rate is shown as the ratio of unemployed persons to the total labor force in percentage terms. So none of this is really that relevant for this answer choice, but this is some good background, I guess, for definitions. They said the natural rate of unemployment is showing the lowest unemployment rate at a stable inflation rate. In other words, it's showing the unemployment rate in the long run, where the employment rate is at the full employment level, which is in the long run equilibrium. If the young workers increase, then the natural rate of unemployment increase. Therefore, option B is the correct option. So this isn't a very good answer, right? It does not break down natural unemployment into frictional and structural, and it doesn't really explain why natural rate of unemployment is increased by an influx of young workers. So not a very good answer. Answer is not clear. Explanation does not address the specific question at hand. Natural rate of unemployment is defined as the sum of frictional and structural, no autocorrect please, unemployment. Structural unemployment is impacted by an influx of young workers. However, frictional unemployment is increased by an influx of young workers. This can be due to a variety of factors. For example, younger workers may have never worked before, so they may engage in the job search process for a longer period of time before finding the right job. Additionally, younger workers may experience higher job turnover compared to older workers. Both these reasons would increase frictional unemployment and thereby also increase natural rate of unemployment. So, the answer choice that the previous teacher gave is correct. It's still B, but we just have a better explanation now, and so that's going to be what we're going to be submitting. So, next question says, the aggregate demand curve slopes downwards for each of the following reasons except which of the following? Number one, the substitution effect. As the price level falls, people buy more of the cheaper goods and less of the other goods. B says the wealth effect. As the price level falls, the buying power of people's savings increases and induces them to spend more. 3 says the interest rate effect. As prices for outputs rise, it costs more to make the same purchases, driving up the demand for money, raising interest rates, and reducing investment spending. And D says the foreign price effect. As the price level falls, the U.S. becomes more attractive to foreigners and domestic residents, increasing net export spending. This is a great question, I think. It really gets to the crux of the issue of what are reasons why aggregate demand curve is downward sloping. And so what we're going to identify as immediately correct are two, like correct as they are reasons, so they're not going to be the right answer to the question, but they are reasons why aggregate demand curve is downward sloping. Two is the wealth effect, and that's definitely one reason it's downward sloping, and I don't think I even have to explain it. I think the answer choice explains it very well by itself. Three, the interest rate effect is also one that is definitely the case. If we take a look at the money supply market graph, this is probably the best way to depict it. So as prices for output rises, it costs more to make the same purchases, which drives up the demand for money. How does it drive up the demand for money, you might ask? Well, if I know that prices are going to be high, then it costs more to make the same purchases. I'm going to hold on to more currency in my basically household because I need more money in my pockets in order to be buying the things I need to buy, and that's going to decrease the money in circulation as you hold that money in the house rather than putting it into depository institutions, and that's going to drive up demand for money, right? As you make sure you want to keep that money high, and that's going to raise interest rates, right? So as the demand for money is going to increase. We get this new interest rate up here, which is an increase from over here. And that is going to reduce investment spending, right? As you have more demand for money by people, and higher interest rates leads to a reduction in investment spending. And that's going to also lead to a reduction in spending. And finally, the foreign price effect. As the price level falls, the U.S. becomes more attractive to foreigners and domestic residents, increasing that export spending. That is, again, another really accurate reason for why the aggregate demand curve will be downward sloping. And so the only thing we see here that is not actually an explanation is a substitution effect, and that is not, this rationale also doesn't even make sense that as price level falls, people buy more cheap goods and less other goods. The aggregate demand curve is a summation of spending on all goods, and so substituting from cheap goods from more expensive goods to cheap goods is not going to affect overall spending levels. So again, substitution effect is not going to be one of those good answer choices for this question, and so that's going to be the right answer here. Aggregate demand curve slopes downwards for each of the following reasons, except for the substitution effect, which states that as the price level falls, people buy more cheap goods and less of the other goods. So let's take a look at the previous tutor's answer. They also pick the substitution effect. As the price level falls, people buy more of the cheaper goods and less of the other goods. Negative slope of an aggregate demand curve is derived from the law of demand that establishes an inverse relationship between the price of a good or service and its quantity demanded. As the price of commodity decreases, the consumer's real purchasing power increases, for they are able to purchase a greater quantity with the same budget. This is known as Figeau's wealth effect that induces people to spend more. Yeah, perfect explanation. At the same time, when there's an increase in price, the transactional demand for money increases as people require more money for purchases. The increased withdrawals of money lead to an increase in interest rates, causing a subsequent increase in the cost of borrowing that adversely affects the level of investment spending. This is known as Keynes' interest rate effect, so that is also correct. A fall in price level also induces foreign buyers as domestic goods become cheaper compared to goods available in the foreign markets. This leads to an increase in export demand, causing a subsequent increase in net exports. This is known as Mundell-Fleming's exchange rate effect. That is all, these three are all good reasons. The downward sloping of the aggregate demand curve, however, cannot be derived from the substitution effect. So I think this is a great answer. Great answer. Very good explanation. And I think that perfectly covers all the explanations for why the other three answers are mechanisms by which aggregate demand is downward sloping and why substitution effect is not a mechanism. So the next question says, two goods Are substitutes if a decrease in the price of one good. A, decreases demand for the other good. B, decreases the quantity demanded of the other good. C, increases demand for the other good. Or D, increases the quantity demanded of the other good. So the first question is, are we dealing with demand or quantity demanded? And so when we're dealing with substitutes, that's a demand determinant. So it's not a change in price, it's a change in a determinant of demand. And that's going to decrease or increase demand overall. So it's not going to be quantity demanded, it's going to be a change in demand. So it's either going to be 1 or 3, not 2 or 4. And the other question is it going to increase or decrease demand? So a substitute is essentially saying that these goods are interchangeable. So if a decrease in price of one good occurs, that's going to increase the quantity demanded for that good, right? And that means if people are buying more of this good, there's less need for the substitute good. And so it's going to decrease the demand for the substitute good. That's why answer choice 1 is going to be the correct answer. Two goods are substitutes. If a decrease in the price of one good decreases demand for the other good. And so let's take a look at the previous tutor's answers. They said decreases demand for the other good. Two goods are substitutes if they act as consumption alternatives for each other, i.e. a consumer can go with either of the two to satisfy his or her needs and or desire. Substitute goods provide identical utility. Price of substitute goods is one of the non-price factors that affect the demand for a good. If there's a decrease in the price of one good, there will be an increase in its quantity demanded as the purchasing power of consumers increases. The increases in quantity demanded of the good, there will be a simultaneous decrease in the demand for its substitute as the consumer is shifting towards the cheaper alternative. The decrease in demand for the substitute good will shift the demand curve to the left. Perfect. Great explanation. Nothing really to correct there, and that was really well done. Okay, next question is multiple questions actually, I think 4 questions. It's talking about oligopolies, right? So it says, which of the following statements about oligopolies is not correct? So an oligopoly, before we even talk about it at all, is an oligopoly, for background, is a market structure in which there are a few very large firms. So it's not a monopoly, a monopoly is there's one firm, mono. Oligopoly is multiple. So there's going to be a few large firms that have large market power, right? And so that's going to be the main way we think about oligopolies. And so the first answer choice is oligopolistic firms always charge the monopoly price. B says oligopolistic firms are interdependent in a way that firms in perfect competition are not. C says an oligopolistic market has only a few sellers. And D says the action of any one seller can have a large impact on the profits of all other sellers. So let's break this down one by one. So A, oligopolistic firms always charge a monopoly price. And so that is not the correct answer, right? So that is not correct, which would make this the correct answer, right? Oligopolistic firms are only going to charge the monopoly price if they collude, right? If they can collude and charge the optimal price of a monopoly, then they would charge a monopoly price. But in a lot of cases, they're not going to collude, and therefore they would charge prices that would be somewhere in between the competitive equilibrium price and the monopoly price. So A is the correct answer, but let's just take a look at the other ones just to be sure. B says oligopolistic firms are interdependent in a way that firms in perfect competition are not. And this is true. So if we think back to our question about game theory, where we talked about how some firms are going to depend on some firms' strategy depends on what other firms choose to do. Game theory applies specifically to oligopoly. So this is indeed the case that in an oligopoly, firms are interdependent, and that's going to be true. C says an oligopolistic market has only a few sellers. That is true. That is the definition of an oligopolistic market. And D says the actions of any one seller can have a large impact on the profits of all the other sellers. And that goes back to our game theory explanation, where one seller's decision impacts the profit outcomes of other sellers. So that's also true. So A is going to be the right answer here. Let's take a look at the answer choice. Yeah, so the previous tutor also said A. B says, which is true of an oligopoly market that reaches a Nash equilibrium? So this is again game theory. So A says the firms will not have behaved as profit maximizers. B says a firm will have chosen its best strategy given the strategies chosen by other firms in the market. C says the firm will not take into account the strategy of competing firms. And D says that the market price will be different for each firm. So B is the best answer here because that is the definition of Nash equilibrium, choosing your best strategy given the strategies chosen by other firms. And so B is going to be the right answer. And let's take a look at the other. Yep, so the other tutor also chose B. 3 says, in game theory, what is a dominant strategy? So a dominant strategy, so let's take a look at answer choices. A, the best strategy for a player to follow, regardless of what strategies other players use. B, a strategy that makes every player better off. C, a strategy that must appear in every game. Or D, the best strategy for a player to follow only if other players are cooperative. And so we talked about this in the other problem where we were, going over game theory. But a dominant strategy is a strategy that says it doesn't matter what other players do, I'm going to do this strategy no matter what, regardless of the other player's decision. And so in the prisoner's dilemma, that strategy was confess, right? That was a dominant strategy. And so A is going to be the best answer choice here. In game theory, a dominant strategy is the best strategy for a player to follow, regardless of what strategies other players use. And again, the previous tutor also chose A, which is great. And finally, 4, which of the following situations provides the largest profits for oligopolists? And so profits are maximized when oligopolists act as a monopoly. So we're going to see if one of those answer choices is going to offer us that as an option. A says that the firms reach a natural equilibrium. B says the firms combine to produce the monopoly output level. C says the firms set price equal to marginal cost. And D says the firms produce a quantity of output that lies between the competitive outcome and a monopoly outcome. So the output that lies between the competitive outcome and the monopoly outcome, that's the regular oligopoly outcome. But the largest profits available are the monopoly outcome, and that's going to be answer choice B, where the firms combine to produce the monopoly output level, aka forming a cartel or through collusion. And so that's going to be the best answer choice. 4 is B. So, the option is therefore option B. That's also the correct answer that the previous tutor provided. So it looks like we got the same answers as the previous tutor did for all 4 questions. Let's quickly read over the explanations that the previous tutor gave. So it says, 1, option A, oligopolist companies always charge a monopoly price. This is wrong because the oligopolist does not always charge higher prices. Individual companies cannot charge higher prices. They charge a monopoly price once they form the cartel and start producing at monopoly level, right? So that's, again, the same rationale that we provided, so that's good. B says that given the strategies chosen by other companies in the market, a company will have chosen its best strategy. That's a simple definition question, and so dominant strategy, that's the definition for dominant strategy. Okay, actually it looks like in 3, we got a different answer. We said for 3 that the best strategy for a player to follow, regardless of what the strategies that other players use. And I think the previous tutor says C, the correct option is option C, a strategy that must appear in every game. So that's not correct, so we're going to actually mark that wrong. 3 is option C, option A, sorry, the best strategy for a player to follow, regardless of the other strategies, regardless of the strategies other players use. This is the correct definition of dominant strategy, not option C. So yeah, it looks like I missed that somehow. So yes, option C, that is not correct. It is going to be option A. That is the definition for dominant strategy. And finally, 4, larger profits in the oligopoly is possible only if all the oligopoly firms combine and start producing the output level at the monopolist level. The option is therefore option B, the companies combine to produce the monopoly output level. So good. I think the previous tutor is making this note that individual companies cannot charge higher prices. That's not true. Like oligopolies will charge higher prices, just they won't charge as high as a monopoly would charge. So to clarify, oligopoly firms will naturally produce a quantity of output in between competitive and the monopoly outcome. They just maximize their profit if they collude and agree to sell at the monopoly level. But yeah, other than that, that's the more clarified version, but looks like we're going to have to mark this answer wrong just because for answer choice 3, the solution is actually option A, not option C. So solution is incorrect here. And it looks like that wraps up everything that we have to cover today. Hopefully that was helpful. We've covered some commonly asked economics questions and gone over some previous tutor solutions. And again, hope everybody's staying safe and that this is beneficial. I'll see you guys later in the week when we do this again. Take care, everybody.